I'm speaking to you from Berkeley, which is the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land ever since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with university values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement and our commitment, by offering this land acknowledgement, I affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold UC Berkeley more accountable to the needs of Native American people. I would like to continue by thanking the Yamashita family for endowing the Foundations for Change Prize. I'd like to thank Professor David Kirp for endowing the Kids First Prize. I'd like to thank members of the selection committees for both prizes. And I'd like to thank Dr. Deborah Lustig, for organizing the selection processes for the prizes, as well as this award ceremony. And she always does an excellent job. Now we have a full and inspiring program for you today. First, we will award the Kids First Prize, an honorable mention. Then we will award the Foundations for Change Prize, an honorable mention. That will be followed by a special keynote by Don Tamaki. And finally, we will have time for discussion with all of our guests today and for some questions. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor David Kirp. Professor Kirp is a professor of the graduate school here at UC Berkeley, and he's been a faculty member of the Goldman School of Public Policy here at UC Berkeley since 1971. In his 17 books and scores of articles in both the popular press and scholarly journals, he has tackled some of America's biggest social problems, including, for example, affordable housing, access to health, gender discrimination, and AIDS. Throughout his career, his main focus has been on education and children's policy, from cradle to college and career. He'll tell you more about why he established the prize, but let me say how honored we are that he chose to establish the prize at the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. Welcome, Professor Kirp, and over to you.
Stephen, thank you very much. You reminded me that once upon a time when you first crossed the Atlantic, you were a student of mine. That's been a few years for both of us. So professors don't usually launch prizes. We don't have the kind of money that would allow us to endow a prize, but this issue has been very, very special to me. The $2,500 award that celebrates students who are committed to creating a better future for children and youth through innovative strategies and their own experiences. And as Stephen mentioned, this is an issue that's been of passionate importance to me. And the prize gives us a rare opportunity to give a shout out to students whose amazing efforts often go unrecognized. And reading through the materials they submit and knowing what the past students have done, this commitment does not end when they graduate from Berkeley. The initiatives they have launched will carry on. It's an important part of the effort that you institutionalize these initiatives so that other students are going to benefit down the road. And I know from reading what they have to say that they'll devote their careers to making a difference in the lives of the next generation. When I read these applications, I'm awed by what they've accomplished. They represent the very best of Berkeley. It's a joy to acknowledge their accomplishments. These prize winners' life stories, which are detailed in the proposals, aren't just about overcoming obstacles that would be overwhelming to most people. Those experiences generated a passion to make a difference, and what a difference they are making. Stephen, shall I introduce Aurora?
Please go ahead.
Okay, so case in point, Aurora Lopez. And I'm going to borrow some material from both students' applications, so they're so impressive. Here's what she wrote. Here's how she describes her background. My desire to help others stems from my upbringing. As a Latina raised by immigrant grandparents and a 15-year-old mother, I was constantly disrespected. I lived in a low-income neighborhood with underfunded schools. My family offered me the only opportunity for a good education by sneaking me into a high-performing school in the neighborhood where my grandmother cleaned houses. I ended up being kicked out of school by the local undercover police for faking my address. That's quite a beginning. Plainly, Aurora did not give up. On the contrary, she rose to the challenge. As an undergraduate at Berkeley, she has promoted education in the Latinx community by organizing college prep courses and implementing growth mindset curricula for students struggling in school. And those curricula, very briefly, really give students a way of tackling material that at first stumps them. Very effective approach to take. And recently, as an intern at Harmony Plus, she created a scholarship opportunity, the organization's entrepreneurial course for disadvantaged aspiring youth entrepreneurs. Currently, she plans to create a program at Berkeley that helps low-income and minority students navigate a career in government and the private sector. From the beginning, she's been interested in the United Nations, and after she graduates, she hopes to work there to bring equitable education for children all over the world. I've little doubt that she'll have an impact. One of her instructors who wrote a recommendation put this very well. Aurora embodies a core value of the Haas Business School, beyond yourself. Heartfelt congratulations, Aurora.
Okay, are you going to do the honorable mention for Tabitha Bell?
At this point, before, okay, I'm happy to.
No, let's hear from Aurora first.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
That's what I thought.
I beg your pardon. Aurora, my apologies. Please go ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much, Professor Kirp. That was so unexpected. And thank you all for coming here, taking this time to speak with us or listen to us. But I was wondering if I could share my screen.
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. So I just want to give a brief journey. Professor Kirp kind of already talked about my journey. But like he said, a lot of my reasoning for joining the public service and education stems from my upbringing. As he mentioned, I grew up with a 15-year-old single mother, and my grandparents who immigrated from Mexico, along with my mom's 3 sisters who were only like a year or 2 older than her, all raised me. So I had a non-traditional family. I really grew up in this village-like community. And as I got older, more kids started coming into my household. And right now there's one missing. There are 7 of us nephews where I helped tutor them, change their diapers. And my brother here, my mother at the time was working in Salinas, which is 2 hours away from us. Every day she'd go there and back. So I often co-parented and stepped in for my brother for parent-teacher conferences, doctor's appointments, etc. That's not part of that's just one factor of why I'm so interested in supporting students. I like to believe a major factor is my high school experience. Here you see me very involved in basketball, very happy, but realistically behind the scenes, I was actually suffering from severe depression. My first 2 years in high school, I went to a high school that was located by Stanford, which was a predominantly white neighborhood. I didn't fit in. I met a lot of ridicule and judgment from my peers, teachers, counselors, and it really impacted me to the point where I got depression. And as Professor Kirp said, my sophomore year, I was followed by the undercover police and was kicked out. So this didn't help my depression. And 2 years later, I ended up attempting to commit suicide. Fortunately, here's me on the left graduating. I overcame the severe depression, and I realized that a lot of this trauma and depression stemmed from the racism I experienced in my school. And so really motivated me to become more politically active. As you can see here, this was me at a protest at my community college. Down here is me registering Latinos in San Jose, which is a very dominant Latino neighborhood, to vote when DACA was being threatened. And in my undergraduate years, my first job was supporting first grade students in an after school program. Here is a drawing of one of the students drew of me, my favorite picture. And this picture I also really love because the day before this, we had a lesson on stranger danger. And one of the students said that brown people are the meanest and scariest people. And those are who we should be scared of. And that really disheartened me because a lot of my students are brown, and especially in the school. So the next day, I made a point of my lesson plan to focus on the Mayans and Aztecs and talk about the lore and fascination behind the pyramids. And I really made it a point to include images because many of these images resembled my students and their parents. And it was actually something they even said themselves in the classroom. So it's a very fond memory I have. College track is my most recent experience. These are seniors in my course where we were helping them apply for college. And these seniors lived in this, I would say, like 5 minutes away from me. So it felt very great to support my community. And I actually wanted to show a quick image or a quick video. Hopefully this plays. This is them opening my So this is them opening up my UCLA acceptance. And what you don't see in that video is these girls were at-risk students who were close to failing that year. And after that video, they started asking questions about college, how they could be competitive, and just showing a strong interest in college, which was not the case when I first started working with them. And it's also a memorable time because when I was helping them, I resonated with them. I was also that girl that was underestimated, that wasn't believed in high school and was talked down upon. And here I was now older, looking at students who were in my place not so long ago, helping them out. So those are just like a few examples of like how I've supported both like elementary and high school students. Now, my time at Berkeley, I'm graduating this semester. I'm doing Cal in Sacramento, which is an internship opportunity for the summer. I'm going to be interning at the Department of Education, helping with the superintendent. I'm also a Gardner Fellow, meaning that I will be going to DC, and I'm really looking for a congressional fellowship to support somebody, Congress member who's very passionate about education. So that's my plan for the next year. And as Professor Kirp said, I'm also trying to start a mentorship program at Berkeley campus that supports first generation political science students to navigate their time at Berkeley and utilize the resources available. And that's it. Thank you all for listening.
Go ahead, David. Can you introduce Tabitha? You're on mute, David.
I am not. I am now unmuted and I'm delighted to talk about, is it Tabitha or Tabitha?
Tabitha.
Tabitha. So Tabitha has her own set of challenges to be overcoming. When she was in 4th grade, she was diagnosed with a debilitating form of muscular dystrophy. Her doctor recommended that she adjust to life in a wheelchair. But after 11 surgeries and what she refers to as a helping paw, her service dog, she's been able to walk. And then as an 8th grader, she talked to her doctor, and the doctor had told her that there are a lot of kids in her situation, but they didn't have the money to afford a service dog, which is a $15,000, $20,000 training process. So she founded, as an 8th grader, a nonprofit called Positive Possibilities, or PAWS, in order to raise money to train service dogs for other children in her situation. So in raising money, she's built websites, organized fundraisers, benefit concerts, and 5K races. The nonprofit has already raised more than $200,000. And while this is not a fundraising event, I know that contributions from everyone who's here would be greatly appreciated. As an undergraduate, Tabitha and her service dog volunteer in the Berkeley Public Schools. She's a linguistics major and is helping first graders with phonics. And here's something that she said in her application. I learned as a child that we all need to help each other and protect the weaker ones in our communities. I envision a future where I become one of those assisting these kids. Tabitha plans to continue serving children as a psychologist while continuing to run Positive Possibilities. The warmest congratulations to you, Tabitha.
Thank you. I'm so honored to have been able to get this opportunity and be honored here today. And I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about my nonprofit and who we have helped. So let me get it up. And then, so as Professor Kirp said, I was in 4th grade when I got first diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. I've never, just actually 2 weeks ago, I got an official genetic diagnosis for what I have. It's called Charcot-Marie-Tooth 4J, and it is a genetic disease that affects, at the moment, only 20 known cases in the world. So that's pretty exciting for me to finally be able to get a diagnosis, and I just wanted to share that with everyone here. But I started PAWS because I remember when I first got a dog, everyone was just like, oh, use a wheelchair, just give up. And I had been around animals my whole life, and we were living down by the by a base down in San Diego, and we started hearing about this new type of service dog called balance and brace dogs, and they were supposed to be helping partially paralyzed veterans with balance and walking and all of that. And so we decided to take the leap and try a service dog, and if it didn't work, I would have a pet, basically. And so we got Sunny, my first service dog. So he's right here, and I got him, and that was a very long process to learn how to walk with him. It was very different, and I think I really wanted to start a nonprofit before I even heard about my surgeon telling me that there's a lot of need for this, because my middle school at the time didn't want me to come back with my service dog. They said, you can use arm crutches, you can use a wheelchair, or you can use a friend's arm, but you can't bring a dog. Which was really defeating for me, because I'm like, I can't, like you've watched me, I can't do that. I don't have that independence. I don't have that strength to do that. And I didn't want to be subjected to a wheelchair. So yeah, so I got Sunny and I transferred schools and was accepted at the new school I was at. And I decided that I wanted to start a nonprofit, not only to raise money for service dogs, but also to raise awareness for what service dogs are needed for. And so that's been a lot of my passion lately, has been advocating for disabled individuals, and especially disabled children, because I think especially disabled children get forgotten about and left in the dust a lot with different access things, because everyone's just like, oh, they're a child, they're just lying about it, they're exaggerating, and that's of course not true. So yeah, so now I go to Berkeley with my new service dog, Knox, right here, or in this photo. And so he's given me so much confidence. I mean, Sunny got me to the point where I could walk again. I mean, because when I first got him, I could barely take 2 steps without holding on to anything. And so now I'm living independently at Berkeley. But yeah, so let me tell you a few about my my placement. So this is our very first placement. Her name is Mary Catherine, and the dog's name is Addie. And Addie was first initially trained as a wheelchair assistance dog because Mary Catherine has a soft bone disease. And when she started watching me walk with Sunny, and we would, because we lived really close together, so we would see each other a lot, she decided that she might want to get the dog cross-trained to be a balance and brace dog. And so Addie is now a wheelchair balance and brace dog for Mary Catherine. So when Mary Catherine is having good days and she's walking, Addie can still help her with that. But Addie is trained also to pick up arm crutches, take Mary Catherine's like shoes and socks on and off, go get her mom, all of that. So that's really cool. Ava and Tucker is also another wheelchair assistance dog for a little girl with cerebral palsy, and Tucker does about the same type of things, helping Ava get shoes and socks on and off, and opening up doors and all of that. Then we just placed Grace and Charlie, and Charlie is actually a hearing alert dog. So Grace has a hearing impairment, and so Charlie is able to alert her to her phone, fire alarms, the microwave, the door, because Grace, she was on campus in her dorm, and there was a fire alarm that went off in the middle of the night, and no one came and got her. And so she was just stuck in the dorm, didn't know anything that it was going on. So that really scared her. So she got Charlie, and now they're living a great life, and she's feeling so much more secure, and I'm so proud of them. And then Tinley and Curly, and Curly is a diabetic alert dog for Tinley and goes to school with her. And Tinley's family has told me about how like Tinley won't even be super near Curly, and Curly will start alerting, and like he'll know when her blood sugar is high or low. So that's really cool. And then yeah, and so those are some of our placements. We are actually working on 2 new placements through the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation. And they both are going to be patients with Charcot-Marie Tooth disease, which is really fun, at least for me, because I haven't been able to get to work with a lot of other CMT patients. And the one is going to be about a seeing eye dog, and then another one is going to be a balance and brace dog. So I'm just really honored to have been able to get this award. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Professor Kirp for the introductions and of course for endowing the award. Congratulations to Aurora and Tabitha on your work. Tremendous, inspiring work. And I'm sure we all look forward to hearing more about what you do in the next steps and the next stages of your life. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Robert, or Bob Yamashita, as I know him, son of Thomas Yamashita, and one of my first friends, as I said, one of my fellow graduate students, and in fact, a mentor to me when I arrived in the United States for the first time in the 1980s. Bob is Professor Emeritus of Interdisciplinary Studies in Science and Society at Cal State San Marcos. And while he is recently retired, he continues to do active research on effective community health promotion and screening. He received his PhD in sociology from UC Berkeley, and he was a graduate student trainee at the Institute for the Study of Social Change, which later became the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. But we're not here to talk about Bob, we're here to talk about his father. And so I welcome Bob to take the floor and to do so. Over to you, Bob.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Yeah, we had to teach you how to be in America and do the English translation.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah. Anyway, to talk about, we set up this prize mainly in recognition of the work my father did. And he was a civil engineer, and he was born in Oakland, and he was actually a 5th-year senior at UC Berkeley in 1941. His actual degree is from the University of Nebraska. And the background story, the bigger story is the whole internment issue and the removal of Japanese Americans on the West Coast to internment camps. But when after he went into the Army, after he had served in the Army, he went to work as a civil engineer in Chicago. And his career then took him to actually opening up a division of his firm in Hong Kong. And if you look at the Hong Kong waterfront, everybody's seen pictures of Hong Kong and the exotic waterfront. Even though he was a civil engineer, he did none of that. He actually provided he built the infrastructure which allowed those buildings to be. Okay, and so so after he passed, we got money. It went to the Institute, and we were trying to figure out how can we recognize the work of this person and what he actually did. And one thing which was clear is all of his work, which he did in Hong Kong, none of it would ever be recognized. It was underground. But it allowed Hong Kong to become the place we view it today. Okay, and so that was the kind of memory which we decided we wanted to work with. And when we looked at the landscape of social change and the activism, we also began to understand that there was a lot of people who did the work of change, but were never recognized for that. You had a lot of people who would self-promote and say, I'm doing all this wonderful work, look at me, and there was awards for those people left and right. And so we were trying to figure out how can we begin to recognize the people who do the work of change, but aren't necessarily there self-promoting themselves, highly visible, etc. And that was the basis for this prize. And if you actually look at how the prize is organized, we don't ask for people to self-nominate. We really ask for people to, say, here's somebody who's been working on in this area of change. We think that their prospects are open, and they're actually doing the hard work of combining the really on the ground type of activity with providing some type of connections so that people can learn from that and perhaps replicate the work. And so it's actually a really unique type of enterprise. And every year we get not a huge number of applicants, but a number of people who get nominated, and they're trying to and the nominator is trying to explain how they do this connection between the work of change and the prospects of enabling that change to happen over the long term. Okay, and rather than me talking about the work, we're actually going to I want the nominators to actually talk about the winner and the honorable mention. So I really want to say the first person, our winner, was actually nominated by two people. She was nominated by Rosalie Fanchel, a UC Berkeley grad student, and Louisa Harstad, an assistant director of Native American Studies Development Program at Berkeley. And I think we're going to ask Louisa to talk about why she nominated the winner and to do the introductions.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Thank you. I do have the pleasure of introducing my supervisor and the founding director of Native American Student Development, Phenocia Bauerle. In addition to her years of work co-creating a land acknowledgement with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, inaugural positions on both the Division of Equity and Inclusion and the UC President's Native American Advisory Councils, an ability to co-organize UC Berkeley's first historic tribal forum and create multiple paths for progress towards Native American graves protection and repatriation. She has quite literally built Native student support and development from the ground up. For almost 8 years, she has been a tireless advocate who brings Native issues to the center of UC Berkeley's priorities. What you can't read about her is her impact that she makes on students. I see every day the trust and guidance they know they can rely on her for. It's those relationships, the connections she's able to make, and the drive and aptitude to get things done that inspired us to nominate Phenocia. We believe that she exemplifies the values that honor Yamashita's legacy of creating bridges and transforming existing social landscapes. There's so much more I can say about her, and still so much I'm still finding out about what she's been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time as the only professional staff in our office. It's really amazing. We look forward to seeing where her vision and leadership takes us.
Thank you, Louisa. Yes, thank you. That was really touching. And I just wanted to say, it is truly an honor to receive this recognition and this prize for a number of reasons. One, receiving recognition through a prize that is stewarded by the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues means so much to me, probably more than any other prize I can think of on campus or award, just because of the work and the critical role that ISSI plays in enriching knowledge and the production of knowledge that at Berkeley. And I've had the great pleasure and privilege of working with the Joseph Myers Center very closely, a component of ISSI, but so it is deeply meaningful. I also am deeply honored to receive this prize based on what it represents, because I think for those of us that do work behind the scenes to ensure that there is social change and that things can move forward seemingly smoothly when there are a lot of bumps and challenges that folks don't see, that means so much to me, because I think that is at the center of a lot of the work that I do. And I come from a long line of folks who I guess I should say I have been raised to believe that that is the right way to go about doing particular kinds of work. So my work centers around, I think, generally increasing the visibility of Native American people and issues that they face, and that looks different in different contexts. And so I also really appreciate this award, and I'm very honored by it, because I think it furthers that awareness, the ability to be recognized, furthers the awareness of Native American issues at Berkeley, but also broadly. And so Louisa was kind to mention some things that I have done, but I think what I'm proudest of in the work that I've been able to do at Berkeley in the last almost 8 years has really been to build relationships that open access to the university resources, and actually that visibilize Native people. I think so much of our history as a country and as a university and the institution invisibilizes Native people for a number of reasons, and invisibilizes Native issues. Until I would say the last 3 years, a lot of folks weren't even aware that literally the university was built on the site that was an Ohlone village, and people assume that Ohlone people are gone. And through my work, I've been able to really bring the Chochenyo speaking Ohlone people, the Muwekma tribe and others into the folds of campus, and start to look at how we can not necessarily have reparations, but how do we include them even, and just actually make visible these living, thriving cultures and people who people just tend to think are gone and in the past because of the specific history that the university has, but also of our country, that colonization and particular kinds of settling has allowed us to believe that Natives are no longer here. And at the same time, being able to work with Native students to see themselves as fully whole and having a place here, and not feel like they are the invisible minority. It's been a pleasure to be, well, maybe pleasure is a strong word. I have really been proud of the work that I have been able to do with others on campus around the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, which Berkeley is one of the worst offenders for not complying for, which to return and repatriate ancestors of different Native American tribes. Berkeley holds the second largest collection of human remains that are Native American to the Smithsonian in this country. And for 30 years has not been in good compliance, not been at even really repatriating at a reasonable pace. And I've been able to find partners here, both Native and non-Native in the administration, who through our conversations, we're able to start to see a way forward and really the importance of moving towards more quick repatriation. And I think that that's been very valuable. It's not been easy. And so I take it back. It's not been a pleasure, but it's been very, it's been good as we move towards better repatriation. I think I have been really honored to be able to work with different tribes, external, even just the Ohlone people here, to think more forward about how we can bring more Native people to campus, how we can really look at how to include Native people in the conversations when people think about, well, where are our people of color partners and how are we working with marginalized communities? Not all Native communities are marginalized, but we often forget that they are there and that we can, as a university, serve those communities, even though they're not a high number of natives here for a very specific reason that has to do with genocide and colonization, but that we're still worthy communities to serve. So I think with that, I will stop. I just want to thank everybody who I have had the privilege of working with. I saw several people in the audience, and that's really heartwarming. And I think that this just means so much to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's always amazing in terms of the selection committee, in terms of when we actually listen to the people who are winners and our honorable mentions, the quality of work which is happening, and we need to congratulate you, Phenocia. Okay, I'd like to now pass it on to Dr. who nominated and our honorable mention. Julia, you're on mute.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this very important and inspiring event. And I'm just in awe of all that our awardees have accomplished and of their commitment to our communities. So my profound gratitude, to the Yamashita family for the vision behind this important award program that acknowledges and valorizes what we often take for granted, i.e. community service that is often below the threshold of visibility. And to the award committee for your thoughtful selections and for recognizing not just the importance, but the necessity of their work, especially in these trying times. It is my heartfelt pleasure to introduce Boon Akamuan. The introduction can only skim the surface of all that he has done and continues to do, especially for our vulnerable youth and communities. Boon Akamuan was born in Ponsali, Laos. His family fled communist persecution and migrated to the United States in 1986. In 2002, he received his Bachelor of Arts in Southeast Asian Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. This, I would like to note, is especially significant because of the persisting barriers that continue to impede access to higher education for Lao Americans. And despite the challenging demands placed on him as a child of a refugee family, Boon was undeterred in his desire to give back to the community and to empower others. And while at Berkeley, he was a co-president of LASER, the Laotian American Student Representatives, and a founding member of the Southeast Asian Student Coalition, SAS, the first such organization at the University of California, and likely the first in the United States. SAS, I also would like to note, is celebrating its 21st anniversary this year. In addition to supporting college students, Boon and the other SAS leaders started a summer institute for Southeast Asian American high school students that continues to thrive 2 decades later. Boon is still actively involved with SAS, particularly with supporting and mentoring current SAS members, as well as fundraising for SAS. And since he was in college, Boon has worked for the East Bay Consortium, CAL, SOAP, helping to increase the number of students finishing high school and enrolling in post-secondary institutions. He is now the associate director. He's very passionate about educating rural and urban youth about life options. And in his spare time, he tends his aquariums, saltwater and freshwater, and volunteers to coach his son's basketball team. But most importantly, he loves spending time with his lovely wife, daughter, and son. I'm also grateful to have had Boon as a student when he was an undergraduate at Cal, and now as a colleague and an ardent supporter and co-creator of many initiatives that we have done and will continue to do. Without the quiet but tenacious leadership and vision of Boon and a small handful of Southeast Asian students at Cal, SAS would never have been born. And Cal and higher education would have missed a great opportunity to demonstrate what true student leadership and lifelong commitment to community engagement really looks like. Thank you, and I give you Boon Akamuan.
All right, thank you, Professor Ong. It's hard to follow up to you every single time when you do your lecture, you know, the 1 hour and a half and all this lecture and everything. First of all, I'm definitely deeply humble and honored to be nominated for this award by the person I admire and respect and mold my professional work after. That is you, Professor Ong. I'm surprised and honored to receive honorable mention for this award. In the current comments of hate, anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-people of color, I wanted to share a story about my family. My family journey took us from Laos to refugee camp in Thailand, and then transition camps in the Philippines before we were sponsored by the International Rescue Committee, and we settled in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas in 1986. Imagine resettling a family of farmers in a big city with little to no money at all 6 of us crammed in a 1-bedroom apartment. With the help of the local Mormon church, my dad was able to land a job as a custodian at a big buildings, and my mom sewing clothes at local clothing shops. After hours, my dad would go collect aluminum cans to recycle for money. My older brothers and I would do the same before school starts. And we had to come back home, get to shower before go to school. We were visited often by the Mormon elders. They speak fluent loud with my dad. I still remember my dad trying to convert them to Buddhism while they try to convert them to Christians, all in our native tongues. It would still give me a good laugh and smile every time I think about it. Rest in peace, Dad. I miss you. We did not stay in Texas long. My parents heard about California. With the help of relatives from Indiana, they led us from Texas to California. This is what we call second migration, which I learned from Professor Asian American Studies class. We were supposed to be set in Richmond, but instead we drove all the way to Vice City, California. Ironically, I met the daughter of a relative that we were supposed to stay with at Richmond at UC Berkeley. I visited her family one time and saw a picture of my mom and my brother with her family in the refugee camp. Life worked in a mysterious way. When you first moved to Visalia, we stayed in a small apartment with other refugees and low-income families. Finally, we were approved for Section 8 housing and moved into a bigger place, a house. I remember a street name very well, Buena Vista Avenue. Not more than a week, we woke up one morning to find our house eggs and our driveway spray painted, "You eat my dog." I was 10 years old at that time. I don't think much of it. I don't think my parents understand either because they can't read. I think they're more upset that someone threw eggs at our house than the spray paint on the driveway. My sibling and I spent all day to clean it off with soap, but not much came off. So a few of the neighbors came by to apologize and help us clean. I am sharing this story now to remind all of us that anti-hate toward Asian and other people of color did not just happen now, but it has always been there. Many refugees and immigrants like my parents didn't know that this was wrong. They think it is the way of life. They do not think much about it. They stay quiet. They not call the police. They figure by staying quiet, everything would change. Nothing has changed. Now we all know that that is not the way it is. This is why I do what I do for work today. My work at the East Bay Consortium, an education nonprofit, I have the opportunity to impact youth we work with through the pre-clinical accounting program. I have been in charge of that program for over 18 years. During that time, I have seen many of my students went on to post-secondary education to better themselves, families, and community. Many came back to their communities as teachers, counselors, and educators, some even working for us now. My work has always been equity, inclusion, and belonging. As you know, besides helping my students, I also, the East Bay Consortium also helped the district doing web grant upload, meaning that students, any student can have access to Cal Grant to further educations, okay? What I instill in my student when I work with them is the same as my parent has taught me. Treat others like you want to be treated. It is hard and challenging to tell the student we work with that they belong in higher ed when they are all going against institution that doesn't want them. While in college, taking Asian American study with Professor several of my classmates, and I do see a few of them here tonight. Thank you for coming. Now we are great friends. I co-founded the Southeast Asian Student Coalition, SAS. It's one of a kind student groups. You know, SAS was found in 2000, initially focused on the refugee experience, which is aimed toward like uniting individuals bound by the historical context of the American war in Southeast Asia. Now, since the new generation, we have more into our missions. We hope to continue to preserve the space of growth and inclusivity. Together, our goal is to foster space to explore Southeast Asian American identity and culture. As a coalition, we unite and empower our community by addressing the social injustice, economic inequity, and political underrepresentations that our communities may face. As you can see, in 2001, we started the SAS Institute for South Asian youth to experience college at UC Berkeley and learn about the history, culture, and most important, themselves. Today, SAS has grown into a larger community, creating CGRAD, the SEAM, the mentorship program, the South Asian Student Prisoners Outreach Program, and create an anthology, which will be available soon at East Wing Books in Berkeley. I would recommend you to buy one. My work with SAS did not stop after I graduated from Berkeley. I continue to be there for current SAS students as a mentor and the bridge between a current SAS and SAS alum. Currently, we are working on a video to document SAS over 20 years of impact to the community. I interviewed numerous alums and current SAS members. What I found refreshing is that SAS has impacted them personally and professionally. Reflection on my work in the community, I consider myself to be a behind-the-scene activist. You will not find me front and center protesting, but you'll find me helping and mentoring those that are being affected. I will continue my work to be behind the scene of helping those in need. Lastly, I want to thank my family for making me who I am today, and my supporting wife, who has to deal with me spending a lot of weekends and nights helping those who are in need. Once again, thank you for this opportunity for this award.
Thank you to Bob. Thank you to the nominators, and congratulations to Phenocia and Boun for your very sincere and inspiring words. We appreciate them very much. Now it is my very special pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Donald Tamaki, who I've noticed has been watching and listening to tonight's event attentively and closely. Don is the nephew of Thomas Yamashita and also has frequently served on the selection committee for the Yamashita Prize. But we invited him today to give the keynote because of his professional work as a lawyer. Don is a senior counsel at Minami Tamaki LLP, and until earlier this year, he was the firm's managing partner. He is the recipient of the ABA Spirit of Excellence Award, the National Asian Pacific Bar Association Trailblazer Award, and the State Bar of California Lauren Miller Award. He received his Bachelor of Arts and his JD from UC Berkeley. In 1976, Mr. Tamaki co-founded the Asian Law Alliance, which has represented thousands of poor and low-income clients. From 1980 to 1983, he was executive director of the Asian Law Caucus in San Francisco, and he served on the legal team, which reopened the 1944 US Supreme Court case of Fred Korematsu, overturning his criminal conviction for defying the removal of almost 120,000 Japanese Americans. In 2018, in response to Trump's Muslim travel ban, he co-founded Stop Repeating History in order to educate the public on the dangers of unchecked presidential power, drawing parallels between the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and the Trump administration's policies targeting minority groups based on race or religion. Welcome, Dan Tamaki, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was such a gracious introduction. It makes me feel important.
Good. The way you
articulate that. Well, first, congratulations to the Kirp Prize winners, Aurora and Tabitha, and to the Yamashita Prize winners, Phenocia and Boun. Thank you, Professors David Karp and Bob Yamashita, my cousin, for generously arranging for funding for these prizes. And thank you, Deborah Friedman-Lustig, for organizing this ceremony. Phenocia, Boun, Aurora, and Tabitha, each of you has done impressive work lifting up, shining a light on, and advocating for marginalized, excluded, invisibilized, as Aurora has stated, and Phenocia's made that comment also, and forgotten Americans. But by making this society more inclusive, I also have to say you are doing your part to save democracy. That sounds dramatic. You probably don't wake up every morning thinking, time to save the country. But I think it's important to connect the dots between the relevance of your work to the nation's polarization and division today. That democracy is imperiled and in need of saving is the subject of my remarks. I don't have to tell you that we are living at a time when leaders have targeted vulnerable Americans for political gain. And their racist rhetoric has resulted in hate crimes, as Boun has pointed out, which in and of itself is terrible. But there is an insidious process occurring that is even more dangerous than hate crimes and which threatens democracy itself. Demagogues worldwide have used the same playbook since time immemorial. The playbook's elements: 1, appeal to prejudice; 2, scapegoat and fearmonger; and 3, traffic in conspiracy theories and falsehoods, also known as, quote, alternative facts. Here's just one example. And Deborah, would you give me a hand here and play the first video?
This pandemic came out of China.
It did come from China.
We're seeing a disturbing rise in hate-filled attacks.
Every disease ever came from China.
There has been an uptick in hate crimes against the Asian community.
A woman wearing a face mask was attacked in a New York subway station by a man claiming she was sick.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
The racism has also surfaced in classrooms.
This was the first time that I've ever felt I was being treated differently for being Asian.
The Chinese Exclusion Act.
Come from China.
If you're from China, I need to know. Move!
Internment camps ordered by President Roosevelt.
Probation for killing a Chinese man.
People go out of their way to antagonize people that look different than them.
Thank you, Deborah, if you could take that down. Well, our StopRepeatingHistory.org campaign produced this video in March of 2020 when Trump began stoking anti-Asian racism. It wasn't hard then to predict that hate crimes were going to follow. Today, there have been over 3,800 incidents of documented hate crimes against Asian Americans. As USF law professor and immigration expert Bill Hing has noted, political leaders have stoked the de-Americanization of Americans by purporting to define who is a real American and who isn't, who belongs here and who doesn't. Just this last week, former Senator Rick Santorum said there was, quote, nothing in America before white colonizers arrived, and that Native Americans haven't contributed much to American culture. Quote, we birthed the nation from nothing. I mean, there was nothing here, unquote. I'm not going to go into how ignorant Santorum's recycled statements of manifest destiny are, but instead I want to make the following point. If you can de-Americanize Americans, it is a short step to dehumanize them. And if you dehumanize people, then any manner of unspeakable horrors are possible, including slavery, genocide, separating children from their parents, forcibly removing people from their lands, and locking entire populations up in concentration camps. During World War II, Fred Korematsu was arrested for defying the mass roundup of almost 120,000 Japanese Americans. He asked, quote, am I an American or not? Phenocia, Boun, Aurora, and Tabitha, I suspect that the people whose lives you've worked so hard to improve have, at one time or another, asked the same question. When demagoguery and conspiracy theories take root and alternative facts hold sway over the real ones, history tells us that society can descend into a very dark place where the law doesn't matter, the Constitution doesn't matter, and even facts don't matter. To this point, literally millions now believe that the presidential election was stolen, despite the utter lack of any evidence of fraud that would have made any difference in the outcome. 147 members of the House and Senate pandered to this preposterous fantasy by voting to overturn the election. As a direct result, the Capitol was defiled, 5 people died, 25,000 troops were deployed to oversee the peaceful transfer of power, and state houses all over the country were hardened against potential attack. Of the 573,000 deaths and counting in the US due to COVID, Dr. Deborah Birx, the COVID response coordinator under Trump, admits that the vast majority of those deaths were preventable and the result of the deliberate denial of facts and of science. This enabling of demagoguery may be the greatest threat to American democracy in modern times. Well, how did we get to this place? We can learn a lot from history. The rounding up of almost 120,000 Japanese Americans, 70,000 of whom were American citizens by birth, is a case study of what can happen when systemic racism normalizes a culture of prejudice such that demonization, falsehoods, and injustice seem perfectly just, perfectly logical, natural, and reasonable. During such time, racism and bigotry becomes policy, and policy becomes the customs and norms and the laws of the land. What was the crime of Japanese Americans? They happened to look like the enemy. General John L. DeWitt, who ordered the roundup, concluded that their race made Japanese Americans inherently disloyal, concluding, quote, the Japanese race is an enemy race. The very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken, unquote. How's that for a conspiracy theory? The very fact that you've never committed a crime is a disturbing and confirming indication that you will commit a crime. Well, General DeWitt was the QAnon of his day. When Bay Area Japanese Americans were ordered out of their homes, my father was about to graduate from Berkeley. And as Professor Yamashita said his father was also queued up to graduate. But because he had been taken away along with their families, Berkeley scrolled up his diploma in a tube and mailed it to him. Deborah, would you mind putting up that next slide? You know, the more remarkable thing about this slide is not the diploma. Although going to Berkeley was quite an achievement for someone who grew up very low income in San Francisco and during California's era of ultra racism against Asians. The remarkable thing really about this photo is the address on the mailing tube. Do you know what Khamnouane Assembly Center, Barrack 80, Apartment 5 was? It was a horse stall. The government surrounded Khamnouane Racetrack in San Bruno, which is now a shopping center just south of San Francisco, with barbed wire and machine gun towers, and forced about 7,800 of these Americans out of their homes at gunpoint, while 10 more permanent American-style concentration camps were being built from California to Arkansas. Metaphorically speaking, for my father, this diploma was the promise of America, but the mailing tube, encircling and constraining that promise, addressed to a horse stall reeking of manure, was his reality. I keep this memento because it reminds me of how far we've come. And Deborah, can you please take that down? Thanks. My parents rarely talked about their bitter experience until one day in 1982, I showed them secret World War II intelligence reports that had surfaced from the Navy, the FBI, and the Federal Communications Commission, admitting that Japanese Americans had done no wrong and posed no threat. Moreover, Department of Justice lawyers penned memos urging their superiors that they had an ethical duty to disclose these official reports and not lie to or mislead the Supreme Court. They were rebuffed by the Solicitor General, which is the top legal officer that argues all cases in behalf of the government before the Supreme Court, the Assistant Attorney General, and War Department officials who suppressed, fabricated, and destroyed the evidence. For my parents, when I showed them these documents, this was a jaw-dropping, mind-blowing revelation. They, of course, knew that they were innocent, but had always thought that their confinement was a result of wartime hysteria. They could hardly fathom that the government's own files revealed that what might have started as hysteria ended in the highest echelons of our legal system as a calculated plan to manipulate the outcome of these landmark legal cases challenging the mass incarceration, even if it meant deliberately lying to the United States Supreme Court. Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hibayashi, and Minoru Yasui defied DeWitt's orders. They were tried and they were convicted. They appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. Because not a single Japanese American was ever charged with espionage or sabotage, let alone tried and convicted, the burden fell on General DeWitt to issue a final report to prove that what he did was reasonable. There was only one problem. It was entirely made up, and the government knew it at the time. This was 1944, Korematsu versus the United States. The Solicitor General Charles Fahey exhorted the court not to second guess the judgment of the military, that locking up these Americans was necessary to the nation's safety. But instead of asking questions, the court deferred to the military, thereby abdicating its traditional constitutional role of asking probing questions. And it failed in that regard to be a check and balance on the executive branch. In a 6-3 decision, Justice Black wrote that this was not a case of racial hostility. Instead, this was a case of, quote, military necessity. But how did the court know that the roundup was necessary? The court essentially reasoned because the military says so. 37 years later, Professor Peter Irons was researching a book on Fred Korematsu and couldn't find Fred's Justice Department files. The archivist in Washington, D.C. said, "They're not here. We don't know where they are." 2 weeks later, that same archivist called Peter up saying, "We found them. They were misfiled in the Commerce Department." Together with fellow researcher Aiko Herzig Yoshinaga, Peter was given access to boxes of documents covered in dust and wrapped in twine, which obviously had not been disturbed for a very long time. Among the first documents they found when they opened these boxes were whistleblowing memos written by Edward Ennis, the Department of Justice head of the Enemy Alien Control Division, and the official responsible for supervising the drafting of the government's brief defending this mass incarceration. Ennis's memo explained that when he began searching for the evidence that Japanese Americans had committed espionage, to his alarm, he found the opposite, that there was no evidence. Naval Intelligence, the lead agency on the West Coast, responsible for national security, concluded the Japanese Americans posed no threat and recommended against the roundup. Ennis wrote to Solicitor General Fahey, quote, "I think we should consider very carefully whether we have a duty to advise the court of the Navy's report. Any other course of conduct might approximate the suppression of evidence," unquote. The Federal Communications Commission found that DeWitt mischaracterized radio signals emanating from Tokyo and called them shore-to-ship transmissions. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover confirmed every complaint of illicit signaling has been thoroughly investigated, and in no case has there been any evidence of espionage or illegal signaling. Department of Justice John Burling wrote to the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, Herbert Wexler, quote, "There's no doubt that DeWitt's statements are intentional falsehoods," unquote. Ennis himself wrote to Wexler, quote, "We have an ethical duty to refrain from citing DeWitt's claims if the Department of Justice knows that they are untrue. The tenor of the final report is that overt acts of treason were being committed. Since this is not so, it is highly unfair to this racial minority that these lies go uncorrected," unquote. Well, in the end, the evidence was suppressed, altered, and in one instance ordered burned. The Solicitor General stood behind DeWitt's final report, even though every intelligence agency had already debunked its claims. On this basis, that a fraud in the High Court had been committed, our team of pro bono lawyers was able to have Fred Korematsu's criminal conviction thrown out. This enormous precedent that is right up there with Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson and some of the worst Supreme Court cases ever issued essentially rests upon a foundation of fabricated facts and fraud. Historian John Meacham has noted that racism and bigotry are perennial American forces, baked into the nation's culture since its inception, and that these forces ebb and they flow. Well, folks, we are definitely in the flow cycle. For example, the Brennan Center reports that in a backlash of the 2020's historical voter turnout, and under the pretense of responding to baseless and racist allegations of voter fraud and election irregularities, state lawmakers have introduced a startling number of bills to suppress voting. Legislators have introduced 361 bills with restrictive provisions in 47 states. history repeats itself. And the lesson of Korematsu is that democracy is not necessarily lost in a sudden coup d'etat. No, you can lose your democracy incrementally. When Americans are de-Americanized, devalued, and dehumanized, when falsehoods and conspiracy theories shout louder than empirically provable facts and science, when the Congress, the judiciary, and the executive branch fail to carry out their role as a check and balance on the abuse of power by the other, when the free press is attacked as, quote, the enemy of the people, when dissenters and whistleblowers are silenced and retaliated against, when Asian Americans are blamed for the Chinese virus, when Mexicans are referred to as drug dealers and rapists, when Muslims are called terrorists, when white supremacists claim that Jews and immigrants are poised to, quote, replace them, when one more African American among countless others is killed at the hands of law enforcement. And it barely evokes a shrug because it is so normal. No, a democracy is not always lost by overthrow. If we fail to stand up and demand inclusiveness, justice, the rightful place of facts, and the rule of law, our democratic institutions can end up hollowed out from within to the point that we will no longer recognize them. In my travels with Fred Korematsu, he always closed his speeches by saying, quote, don't be afraid to speak up. Well, Phenocia, Boun, Aurora, and Tabitha, you've not been afraid to speak up. Keep on doing what you are doing. Your voices are more important now than ever. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Don Tamaki. A chilling story, which I've heard before, but becomes more chilling each time you hear it. Clear, concise, and compelling links between the past and present that you bring to us with immediacy and urgency. You inspire us and you remind us how important it is that today's awardees and those who received honorable mention continue to do their work. We now have time for a few questions before we end. And the first thing I'd like to do is ask if any of the panelists or the speakers today would like to ask a question or make a comment. If you would, just put your hand up or just go ahead and raise a hand. Anyone want to ask a question, make a comment? No. Do we have any questions in the question and answer, Deborah? Well, let me ask a question. Given the links that you've made today and given the range of problems that confront us, where would you advise young people to begin? You can't start everywhere. You have to start somewhere. How do people decide? How do young people, how do students decide where to start and not become overwhelmed? Maybe some of the awardees or mentee or honorable mention could tell us why they decided, or remind us again why they decided to start where they started. Does anyone want to get going?
I can.
Please go ahead.
I think I start where I started because I do believe in a cycle of poverty, right? I mean, the work that I do, all I need is one student to go on to college to make an example for their immediate families or their communities. I can share stories that we had families that has gone to a program. Not a single one had gone to college because some circumstances, right? Undocumented, be involved in gang, or cannot. Some high achievement cannot go because of money, financial. Eventually, just one last student. I say, I need to get you into college. And currently now she at UC San Diego, currently in her third year. Now her younger nephews are in the programs, and we have more coming in the program. I just feel like, we have to start young. It cannot be like when they are in high school age, college age, but we have to start really talking to our kids at a young age. And I think it's all coming to the community. the community come together and help each other also with that. So
Thank you. Anyone else? Deborah?
We had a question that came in through the Q&A that Aurora already answered, but not everyone might have seen it. So someone asked what a turning point for Aurora was in overcoming her or moving on past her depression.
Deborah, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, that would be
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so something I didn't mention in my speech was in my sophomore year in high school, the staff in my school had already known that I was depressed. But what happened was it was a very chaotic process. And being from an immigrant household, depression wasn't very welcomed. In fact, when my stepdad knew I had depression, his first reaction was, "Are you doing this to get attention?" And so I just kind of fell through the cracks my sophomore year, and nothing was done about it. And it was in my senior year where I finally was institutionalized. They didn't let me leave until I had a therapist. My social worker was like, "You cannot leave until you have someone to talk this out with." And I think that was part of the turning point where I was finally at home talking about what was going on. I had 3 teachers specifically that year that really involved themselves in my life. One of them was a teacher who looked just like me, came from my community, but was a Stanford graduate. And I had a mentor that looked like me, but just teachers in general who were really involved in my life. And once I graduated and started community college, I felt like I didn't have that weight of high school. When I was in high school, I felt like I already had like this stereotype, or I was already kind of like given this, like I had this belief among the counselors that I just couldn't shake off. And so when I went to community college, I was just like, this is a whole new start. I'm not going to let the trauma that I experienced in my high school continue on. I just felt like I had a determined outlook, and that was thanks to just the support I got from my teachers in therapy that summer before.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question actually for Dawn that occurred to me. So we're kind of used to the youthful idealist, and we have some examples in our midst today, but I'm just curious, like, what keeps you going, Dawn? I mean, a lot of people lose that commitment to social justice, or maybe they don't lose the commitment, but they don't act on it anymore in some way as they go get older, or maybe they just write a check if they can. But you've continued. I know you were like doing tours of college campuses, and you've what has kept you going? And do you have any advice to people who are at an earlier stage of life than you?
I'm channeling my anger into a more creative outcome, and well, I'll be irrelevant at someday, and I'm probably the oldest guy in this whole collection of people, but I'm not quite ready to be.
I'm a lot older than I look, Don.
You're a young man, Stephen.
No, I look young, but I'm not. I'm a lot older, but go ahead. We like a sense of humor to help us get along, right?
Yes, and I guess the way I see it is, I still feel I have something to say, and the people, the honorees, and you all also make me feel more committed. A couple things just to tag along to the other comments of Aurora. Because I've been around a long time, I've seen social change and how it happens, and it happens with doesn't start with a lot of people. It starts with a critical mass of competent, committed leaders who have a single-minded determination to get things done. And each of the honorees has demonstrated that. It also happens, lasting social change happens when leaders take note of what the people are saying and the organizations that's being done where you are locally and regionally. So each of you all, the honorees, are activists and doing work on the ground. And in so doing, well, certainly you help help individuals and help a community and help your particular region, you also contribute toward changing hearts and minds and changing this culture. And ultimately, my humble opinion, you know, the laws don't change, policy doesn't change until, you know, we change culture, norms, belief systems, ideologies. And it does happen. And so, you know, to answer your question, Deborah, you know, of course, I'm angry at things that have gone on, especially in the last 4 years, but I'm also heartened by you all, the honorees that have been able to affect change in their own area. And then on a sort of a national scale, we've seen it. I mean, the velocity of the speed of gay marriage, for instance, was remarkable. The Me Too movement is also something. And we've seen the civil rights movements resulting in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, which opened the doors for a lot of immigrants to come to the United States, was really the result of a shift in the values of the country. But as I was saying, you know, the whole thing ebbs and flows. And we're now in a period of inflection. The country is so polarized. You know, I would have never thought the year would end or the year would begin with a insurrection attack on the Capitol. I mean, what you're witnessing, what we're all witnessing, is something that is completely unprecedented. And so it really, I mean, your actions and your projects and your efforts fit in with that environment. And it's distressing, but yet it does open up the opportunity for each of you all to be a change agent, which you've been. So I really appreciate your work, and I'm talking to the honorees and the professors too for creating, you know, and facilitating that.
Yeah, sometimes professors have some good ideas. Not always, but sometimes. Bob, do you want to make any last comments? You've been your family gave this award. Are you optimistic?
On different days. But
where do you
really,
find your inspiration?
Yeah, no, it's really about, you know, the small steps in the struggle. It's like you have to wake up and you have to do things. And I think one of the great things about the whole Yamashita Prize is you actually see people who are in the trenches doing the work. And without those people, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a lot of the real work it really goes unrecognized, and it's really trying to, you know, say the work matters. There's too many people out there who, you know, self-promote. I do know, you know, just from what Phenocia was saying, on our campus, on my old campus, which is in San Diego County, has the largest number of Native American reservations in the state. And, you know, the people they put in charge are the ones who are self-promoting themselves, and they could really care less about, and they're disinterested in doing the work that is really needed to see change happen.
Bob, I'm going to have to rush you because we're about to be cut off.
Yeah, so, you know, it's in the work of the youth. They're out there doing things and trying things, and, you know, and so, as you said, sometimes faculty do make mistakes, and we do encourage things. And, you know, I usually have to apologize to my students when that happens, but, you know, you see great things happening on the ground, and, you know, all the awardees and even most of the nominees are them. So.
Thanks, Bob. We have about 15 seconds left. Let me thank everybody. Let me thank David Kirp. Let me thank the Yamashita family. Thanks to the nominators for the Yamashita Prize. Final congratulations to Phenocia, Boun, Aurora, and Tabitha. Special thanks to Don Tamaki for his remarks today. And thanks to everyone for joining us. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your attention. As you can guess, a professor like me of 30 years have been to many boring lectures. There was nothing boring about today. I felt inspired. I felt motivated. I felt a little sad because that's what we're dealing with. But I thrive on your energy. We congratulate you and we wish you every success. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.